Sanding, shaping, balancing. For centuries, mastering your instrument meant mastering these crafts too. But now, D'Addario is refining craftsmanship for the 21st century by refining their reeds and mouthpieces with the world's most innovative techniques, so you can spend less time sanding, shaping, and balancing, and more time perfecting your own craft. To learn more about the new era of craftsmanship from D'Addario Woodwinds, visit d'addario.com/woodwinds.
I'm always trying to get better because you're only ever doing one of two things. You're either getting better or you're getting worse. There's no cruise control. There's no stagnating. So I always pick one thing from yesterday's show that I know I didn't do as well as I can, and I make sure that it's better at the show that I'm playing that day.
Hi, I'm Sean Perrin, and you're listening to episode 86 of the Clarinet podcast, the show where I discuss all that's new and neat with clarinet with the neatest people in the industry. In today's episode of the podcast, I'm thrilled to be joined by Garrett Hack, who is a freelance Broadway musician who's been touring for several years with various shows. We talk a lot about what it's like to play repetitive music, how to keep your chops up on the road, travel tips, and some interesting and surprising onstage accessories you'll need to have if you want to play in this line of work. Detailed show notes for today's episode can be found at clarinet.com/86. That's the number 86. While you're there, I invite you to join our email mailing list. Also, you can support the podcast directly on Patreon or indirectly by clicking on the links and offers tab, where there's some exclusive and exciting offers for Clarinet listeners. And now for today's episode of the podcast with Garrett Hack. So tell me, what was it that inspired you to become a Broadway musician?
Oh man, so many things. So I had my first Broadway musical experience in Toronto, Ontario. I went to see the producers, and my parents took me down to the pit rail. And when I looked over, I saw, maybe 20, 25 musicians down there, and thought, wow, geez, those are real people playing all that stuff. And this is something that people actually do. And sort of after that moment, I got hooked on the idea of playing a lot of different instruments and hopefully eventually incorporating that into my career. And that was, I think I was about 15 or 16 years old when that happened.
Wow. So you hadn't started playing by 16?
No, I started saxophone after I got my driver's license.
Wow. So was that your first musical experience at that age?
I had taken piano lessons prior to that and despised them deeply. But saxophone, yeah, that was my first sort of live experience hearing saxophone and doublers in a show or even performance setting.
That's really interesting. So it just seems like 16 is a late age to start. So were you in school band or, because 16, what grade would that be? 10, 11?
I was in grade 11. I was a year ahead of most kids my age. So I would have been in grade 11. And I did play clarinet in high school, but it was very part-time. I only played in one ensemble. I went to a high school where there were a lot of different ensembles, but I only played in the general band. And I always hid in the back and quite often didn't even have a reed on my clarinet. So I'm ashamed to admit. But I wanted to switch to saxophone and spoke with my band directors about it, and no one would allow me to. They said, it's too late. You don't take private lessons. So I thought, you know what, maybe if I take private lessons, people will do it. So then I went and looked for a teacher who would take me on, and no one would take me on. Everyone said, it's too late. You're too old, blah, 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 blah. And I thought, really, no one wants my $60 an hour. So I ended up renting my own saxophone, teaching myself, and entered the Kiwanis Music Festival, which is a big music festival in Ontario. And I believe it's actually
Canadian.
Yeah, it's nationwide as well. So I entered that, and I ended up winning the soloist competition. So I came back and asked my teachers again at high school. It's like, can I join the bands now? And they said, yeah, you can.
Who wants to teach me now?
Yeah, exactly. So that was a bit of an unfortunate experience. I had 4 or 5 teachers, all of whom said, you can't do this, and I thought that was really interesting. I mean, why not? It's not going to make your day any more difficult. And if I have to stop later, then I have to stop later. So I didn't feel like it was any different if they let me play or not. But they were very adamant not to let me learn the saxophone.
Do you think it's because you were coming across as a promising clarinetist? Because that's the instrument you started with, right?
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, it's possible.
Maybe not with your reed off in the back there. Maybe not.
Yeah. I mean, I've never asked them. Most of it was, I think, them assuming where I wanted to take music. Nobody was against the idea of me being a music educator, but a lot of them were looking at it, how viable is it for a 16-year-old kid who is just starting to really take this kind of music seriously? How viable is it for them to go on and have a performance career, whether it be as a recording artist or a soloist or winning a chair in a symphony? A lot of what I was told was that I couldn't do it because it was too late. It was too late for me. So, I mean, in essence, what they're looking at was, I would say I was almost done grade 11. So really it would have been about 4 or 5 months until my senior year started. So they were looking at a very restricted timeline where I would be, hypothetically taking university auditions within the calendar year. And I feel like maybe it was partly their fear over my career choice, or maybe they didn't feel like I was taking it too seriously. I mean, the way I was looking at it was, look, this is fun. I want to do it. If it works, great. If it doesn't work, that's great too.
Yeah, which is a good attitude to have.
Yeah, I maybe it was just some adults feeling that they knew better, or maybe because their career hadn't gone the way they wanted, that how could this kid possibly have things go well for him?
Yeah, jealousy is a real thing. You make me think of 2 actually really kind of interesting things. And one is your story about discovering or hearing Broadway for the first time is actually really similar to mine. I can recall, I think I was about 6 maybe. And my mom had taken me to a presentation of Cats, which was on tour and was coming through town. And we went, and I sat through the whole thing. I thought it was pretty good. I was pretty impressed by the people on stage doing their thing. But from where I was sitting, you couldn't see the pit. And in the age of canned music, even in like the 90s, I guess this would have been early 90s, age of canned music, I didn't know that the music was live. And it wasn't until at the end, my mom said, something like, why don't you go look over at the orchestra? And I was like, wait a minute, what? There's people playing along with this? Like, how do they do what? Like, I was shocked, So that was a real kind of moment for me too, where I was like, my God, I can't believe that this was all just produced right here. Like literally every element was produced in this room. That's amazing. I think a lot of people have that experience when they go to these kind of shows in this day and age, where we're used to sort of this, recordings being produced. So what do you think about that? I mean, is that something that people encounter, kind of a level of amazement to what you do?
Yeah, I mean, the current show I'm with right now, a lot of people have that reaction. They'll come down to the pit and they'll say things like, wow, I'm amazed. Like, you get so much sound with, so few individuals. I mean, there's 14 of us in the pit. And we definitely do sound a lot bigger. I mean, that's sort of a testament to our sound engineer, but also to the orchestration and to the writing itself. But one of the most common comments that we get with the show is, you guys sound so much more lush and rich and full than your numbers would suggest. Yeah.
So you think you're inspiring students that are the age of 16 or younger today with your playing?
I hope so. Yeah. I hope I'm inspiring. I mean, it can be a little tough sometimes, because doublers sort of occasionally, especially with a certain crowd, have a negative connotation to them, because you spend, if you play 3 different instruments, then you've divided your time among the 3, and you're not as good as maybe you could have been had you only stuck to one instrument. But I would hope that I have triggered more smiles than tears over the course of my career.
I like that.
But there's definitely I've definitely had some people, voice their frustrations over my choice of playing as many instruments as I do, and I can totally understand that. But the other side of the coin is, would I have had the strength and fortitude and focus to play one instrument versus I think I play about 12 or 13 right now.
Well, let's talk about the instruments that you play. I mean, I'm aware of the clarinet, saxophone, flute, and bassoon, of all things. So you're kind of a quadrupler, but you say 12 or 13 instruments?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm cheating a little bit because I play things like the Irish flute is something that I have picked up over the last couple of years and have been working on.
Well, it appears sometimes on a list, probably.
Absolutely. I mean, the guy playing "Come From Away" right now is playing something like 3 or 4 different flutes, a number of different whistles, and then some pipes as well. Lion King, of course, has Irish flute on it. I believe. Let's see what others. There's. It's come up more in the last 10, 15 years than it ever has before in Dublin, for sure. And then Chinese flutes as well, Bansuri flutes, and some other Japanese flutes. There's a lot of different pipes out there, and they're a lot of fun to get into. And I'm slowly just dipping my toe into that vast oasis of headache, but also hopefully some fun too.
So what's this process like? Do you just sit down one day and be like, oh, I'd really love to learn some Irish flute? Or do you get a call that has some Irish flute on it and then go, okay, I need to learn this in 6 weeks?
Well, my the beginning of my career was absolutely like that, where I'd get a call and they say, "Hey, Garrett, do you play alto flute?" And I say, "Yes, of course." And of course, I've never held one in my life. So you immediately go over to the music store and you rent one, or you call up a friend that has one and you borrow it and you play long tones for 8 hours a day. But recently, it's more of you hear something and you say, wow, that's really cool. I want to be a part of that. And you find out that it's, what sound is that? Like, that person's getting a really nice, dark and woody flute sound. What kind of flute are they playing? And then, lo and behold, it's some kind of Irish flute. And so I had this experience. I was listening to a flutist named Hans Araki, who was playing, and he's a West Coast flutist, and plays a lot of folk, but he also plays some, contemporary stuff as well. And he was playing this one flute solo, and I had no idea how he was getting the sound he was getting. I found out he was playing an Irish flute, actually made by a Canadian company out in Nova Scotia. So I called them up and said, "Hey, I heard Hans Araki was playing one of your flutes. I would really like to know, what flute he was playing and how much it was." So, you strike a deal, you buy the flute. Comes in the mail. You do some long tones and you learn it. So that's how Irish flute sort of joined my life. It was also just out of a desire to learn the Lion King book. There's a long list of Broadway shows that I would always love to play. Should the opportunity arise. And Lion King has something like 15 different flutes on it on the flute book. So
wow.
I mean. Irish flute being one of them. I think there's Irish flute in 3 different keys with that show. So I bought one, and now I'm one of 15, or I believe it's 15 flutes. I'll have to double check that, but there's a lot, and it's a really fun book. If your listeners are really into music theater, they should definitely check out that score.
This brings up about 100 more questions for me, but I want to be mindful of the fact that I interrupted your list. So we had saxophone, bassoon, clarinet, Irish flute. What else is in there?
I play I play a little bit of Bansuri. I mean, I hesitate to list that because it's such a nascent instrument in my arsenal. But I also include bass clarinet because I feel that is a fairly different instrument than clarinet itself. I know many great clarinetists who do not consider themselves in any regard a bass clarinetist, and vice versa. I do include the 4 saxophones in my list because, again, a great tenor player does not necessarily make you a great alto player, and vice versa. Soprano is also a very difficult instrument to play. I play soprano in my current show, and there's a lot of really difficult high fidelity, high control type tone and pitch situations. So I definitely believe, even though the fingerboard and the keywork is essentially identical, there's so many different things like vowel shape and air and reed strength and tip opening. There's so many different aspects that are different, even though there are a great deal of things that are similar. I do play bassoon. I also include alto flute in that list. I include piccolo on that list. I include E-flat clarinet on that list.
13 is starting to sound like a pretty conservative number.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm probably, compared to some of my colleagues, I would say I might be on the low end. Some of my more accomplished colleagues in New York and Toronto who have been around the circuit, longer than I have, play even more instruments. And that's just such a great testament to their work ethic and their ability. But eventually I think it just sort of happens. Like you said, you get a phone call and it's like, hey, Garrett, do you play this? And maybe you play something similar. Like maybe if I got a call and said, hey, Garrett, do you play Irish flute in F? Like I've never played an Irish flute in F, but I played an Irish flute in D, E, and E flat. So how different could F be? And then, A clarinet versus B flat clarinet. It's there's definite differences, and obviously the some of the excerpts are going to be very different, and the repertoire is going to be very different. But in essence, it's not a great stride away versus something like, hey, play if you've never played bassoon before, and then all of a sudden you have to navigate the world of double reeds. That to me is a much greater stride than going clarinet to clarinet or flute to flute.
So it's interesting because the A and B flat clarinet is one of the only instruments that does not get paid doubling for, I think, precisely the reason you mentioned is because they basically become one item. If you're playing A, it's assumed you also play B flat or vice versa in an orchestra, for example.
Which is very cruel.
Yeah, because you still have to have two instruments warmed up and ready to go.
Yeah.
I agree in a way. But so my question, I'm not sure if you're entirely comfortable answering this, but when you add an instrument like Irish flute or whatever to the gig, and let's say you add 10 instruments, how does that affect your doubling rates as a union member?
Well, that's going to vary depending on what your contract is. So if you're if you're a local, say in Toronto or New York, and you're hired to play a long running show, I think you get paid. There's a base pay you get paid for 3 instruments, and then you earn a bonus for every additional instrument. The union contract that I'm with right now is a CETA contract, which is a touring contract. And I get paid for 3 instruments flat. So if I played 8 instruments, I still only get paid for 3. But on the other side of the coin, I am only currently playing 2 instruments for the show, but I am getting paid for 3.
Well, yeah, I guess I just never realized how that worked. I've played, A and B flat, which obviously you don't get doubling, but I've added E flat or bass or something else to that before, and then you do experience doubling. But then I was wondering, like, wait a minute, are you going to be the next Bill Gates if if you're playing 8 instruments on a show, or what does it look like? But I guess that answers that.
Well, most shows that come out these days will cap you at 3 for that very reason.
Yeah.
And it's it's all about the bean counting and all that kind of stuff. But if you look at older books, you can actually almost correlate how people are writing to the pit minimums that you see in the current AFM union agreement.
Interesting.
So it's not a perfect science, but it is something interesting, and it is something that you should absolutely be aware of as a doubler.
So you've gone on the road now for several months, and what I want to get into is a little bit of the logistics here of how does this work? You have 13 instruments that you could potentially double on, and let's say you have to take 6 or 8 of those on the road. What does that even look like?
Oh, it's ridiculous. So on Kinky Boots, I played 4 instruments. I played tenor and alto sax, clarinet, and flute. And that obviously, just those 4 instruments alone will exceed the carry-on limit for flights. So what Kinky Boots did for me is I had a road box already that I had bought from actually Dustin Richardson, and I packed my saxophones in there, my stands, I had a collapsible music stand, and everything else that I sort of needed in the pit. So like maybe a chair cushion and an empty water bottle, all that kind of stuff. And they shipped that to New York, where I met them for rehearsal, and then I just carried my flute and clarinet in a backpack. So that's sort of how that looks. I mean, what other people have done and what I've done for other, union shows or like union gigs that I've done, where I do play a lot of instruments, like going into New York City to play like at the Opera of America or something like that. What I often did is I would carpool with somebody else, and I would go half on parking, and we'd drive in, because some shows I was playing, I was playing the low reed book. So it would be like baritone sax, and then, bass clarinet and bassoon, and maybe tenor sax as well. And that's way too much to take on a bus. That's way too much to take on the subway. So quite often you just bite the bullet and you carpool with one or two other people, depending if you had a van or if you had a sedan or something like that. But you need a lot of patience and a lot of pre-planning. And having really good cases helps. Like if you have cases with wheels, great. If you get one of those grocery carts on those collapsible grocery carts, those are a lifesaver. You can fit a lot of gear and a lot of stands on there. And a lot of people forget that the stands are what kills you, because you already have your hands on all the handles of your horns, but you still haven't brought your music stand. You still don't have your music. You still don't have maybe your reed kit or whatever else you're bringing, and then your music stand, your instrument stands. So it's definitely a juggling act, and it took a few gigs for me to really learn the right formula. But getting the right case, like you can get a doubler's case, that's great. You can get some kind of bag that will fit a lot of things comfortably and where you can access everything in it, fairly easily. I would highly recommend looking into stuff like that.
And so how long would a normal kind of tour be in this industry? I mean, do you have a permanent address right now and you're just kind of on the road for a couple of weeks, or what does it look like?
So I forwarded all my mail and like all that kind of important government stuff to my parents' address. So I wasn't, missing out on anything that was important coming through. I have forwarded some mail to certain cities if we're sitting in a city for, 3 or more weeks, but generally I try and just keep it consistent. Tours usually last a year to 2 years. Some go even longer. I mean, like the Lion King tour has been going on for well over 10 years now. I think Phantom was around for about 19 years, and various iterations. There's some tours that have a lot of staying power. Like Wicked is definitely still on tour. Book of Mormon is still on tour. Les Mis just recently went back out. I know Cats is going back out. So there's a lot of Broadway heavyweights still out there. Like Beauty and the Beast was out for a really long time, but most shows last about a year, about 2 years, and that's because of the Broadway subscription series with Broadway across America and across Canada, and that sort of series incorporates a lot of the major cities that will have an active audience that are coming to see shows every year, and generally that involves when you subscribe you have to buy tickets to 3 different shows, and I mean past season and next season in particular, because of Hamilton, a lot of the tours out there are having very good years and very strong years because of the subscription series, where people are buying tickets to go see Hamilton, and then the craftier sort of whoever planned this, I applaud you, because a lot of other shows are benefiting, because in order to get tickets to Hamilton, you quite often have to buy tickets to see 2 or 3 other shows. Kinky Boots is still going. I actually left the tour before it closed, but Kinky Boots I think is in its 3rd year or maybe 4th year now. And I did a good run of the union part of the tour. I believe it's gone non-union now for their on-stage talent, and I think the musicians are still union, but I'm not sure.
So when you say it goes on tour for a year, are we talking you're on the road for 52 weeks?
You will occasionally get weeks off if the show is moving from coast to coast, because the trucks that carry the set have to physically cross the country. So my current show will be experiencing that in a few weeks. We'll be going from I believe it's Portland, Oregon, and then we have a week off, and our next city is Hartford, Connecticut. So we got to cross the whole country. So they're going to give the team, some time off. One, so that we're not on payroll, and two, so that everybody gets a bit of a break.
What are some of the mental challenges, and how do you deal with life on the road like that, being away from family and friends and potential life partners and normalcy and things like that, and also playing the same music over and over? I mean, how do you deal with these challenges mentally?
Yeah, it's definitely not for everybody. With veteran touring musicians, you'll find they often have very similar traits. They're often very, agreeable people, or they're very good at conversing and negotiating. They're quite talented, but they also usually have a solid routine, and routine is usually what carries people through a tour. I mean, and from what I've seen, a solid routine will make or break your touring experience. And what I've done is I always make time to practice every day, even if it's only 15 minutes. It's like you have to hold yourself to that routine of playing your instrument, because if you get to, I got to, with Kinky Boots and Mouse, show 400 or something like that. When you get to the end, if you've stopped practicing and if you've stopped appreciating, some of the things that you'd like to work on, or some of the things you appreciate about the instrument, when you get to the show, it's you can start to feel a little bit of resentment, a little bit of apathy, and that can come out in your playing. Like it's musicians for sure, and I believe even just the regular audience can hear when an orchestra is involved or not. So some of the things that I've done on the road that have contributed to some of my longevity, because I've been on the road. I'm almost approaching a year with Love Never Dies. I did about a year with Kinky Boots. I did a non-ec of Saturday Night Fever, and I did 3 years of Chicago. So what I did is every week I take a half day off of no playing. I don't listen to any music that's similar to what I'm playing. Maybe for example, with my current show, it's almost completely clarinet. It's about 90% clarinet, a little bit of soprano saxophone, and it's all very much in the classical and orchestral vein. There's almost no jazz. So what I'll do is maybe I'll go and I'll transcribe Michael Brecker on my half day off, just to do something completely different. And then the opposite was true when I was with Kinky Boots. I mean, I was playing mostly rock and roll tenor sax and alto saxophone. So what I would do is I would go and play Glazunov or Villalobos or something like that. Just do something completely different to keep me sharp. I also I will trade lessons with other people in the orchestra, whether if they're a flutist or just a pianist or whatever. I'll schedule time in with somebody else just to do something, just to have fun. And like right now, I'm with a couple of the keyboardists in the show. We're working on recital material, and we're hoping to put on some little side shows as we go across the country. I also make time to call people, to keep in touch, to, remind yourself that there's life outside of the tour bus and the theater. And then, I also make sure one day a week I am going out into the city, wherever we are, and doing something. Kind
of being a tourist a little bit.
Yeah, just 100% be a tourist. Like we were in Vegas a few weeks ago. So I mean, admittedly, it was multiple days of me going out and enjoying the city. But, I would go out and I visited, the park at Red Rock. I went to the Bellagio. I saw the fountain show. I saw a Cirque du Soleil show. I went out and appreciated the things that city has to offer that, isn't your show, which can be tough because quite often the show that you're with is going to be on at the same time that most of the fun things are. So you often have to go see matinees, or you have to go very early in the day to go anywhere and enjoy something. But I am a firm believer in sticking to that sort of small victory schedule format where you're forcing yourself to do things, because if you finish the week and you didn't do anything and then you start to feel bad about it, that can absolutely spiral and snowball into a very big problem where it's like all of a sudden, now things are really bad because I didn't do anything, and I feel really bad about myself because I didn't do anything. Like, the quality of your life is directly related to the quality of your communication. And if you start talking to yourself in such a way that supports and allows negativity to thrive, then you're going to be in trouble.
So as far as the music specifically, how do you keep your mind engaged? You said you played this show 400 times.
What I usually do is I'll look at yesterday's show and say, oh, you know what? I didn't do this particular part of this particular number as well as I know I can. So I'm going to really focus on the elements of that part and do that thing really well. So maybe it was like a heavily articulated section. So then the whole show, I'm really focused on the quality of my articulation. And if that's too broad, then maybe I just think, you know what, I'm just going to think about the quality of articulation on an E or on a G or maybe E minor, like if there's an E minor scale or whatever. And I'll pick something to focus on to make better than the day before. Because I'm always trying to get better, because you're only ever doing one of two things. You're either getting better or you're getting worse. There's no cruise control. There's no stagnating. Like you're either getting better or you're getting worse. So I always want to get better. So I always pick one thing every show that I want to do better. And it's usually fairly easy because there's, I don't know, 2,000-3,000 notes in any given show. So there's no way you're going to play each and every one of them exactly the way you want to every single night. So I always go and pick something from yesterday's show that I know I didn't do as well as I can, and I make sure that it's better at the show that I'm playing that day.
Yeah, I think that's such great advice generally, even just for practicing for students doing virtually anything. Like, look at what you did and think about the step to make it a little better. And after a bunch of steps, maybe it's a lot better.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if you're practicing and you're breezing through like some kind of scale exercise, and let's say that's the only thing you play that day, if you're not focused on improving that, and you're playing scales and you happen to flub a few notes and then you keep going on to the next key, I mean, the only time you played that scale that day, you played it wrong. It's really important to maintain the integrity of your focus. I would much rather, if let's say I screwed up like a whole scale in one show, which, knock on wood, hasn't happened yet, but say I do, maybe I focus on the quality of the very first note, like how I start that scale. Or maybe it was the last note, or maybe it went over the break. So maybe it's the first note over the break that tripped me up. I just focus on the one note rather than the whole scale. And quite often, the whole scale will improve because, maybe I got a better start to it, or I crossed the break more cleanly, or any number of different things. But at intermission and sometimes after the show, people will come up to my stand and you'll quite often find me ghost fingering a couple passages, because maybe my B flat to my B on the clarinet wasn't as quick as it could have been. Maybe no one else probably noticed, but I felt it, or I noticed, and I'm just trying to make sure that if that's the only time I go B flat to B that day, I'm making sure the very last time I do it, I did it the way I wanted.
So for people who are on the show, or on the road as much as you, I always love to ask, do you have any travel tips that the average person could take advantage of?
Oh, absolutely. Invest in comfort. So I've played a lot of different theaters. I would recommend looking into either a backrest or a seat cushion, or both if you prefer both. I happen just to prefer a backrest. You can get them at the dollar store. I've seen them at Bed Bath & Beyond. They're just this black sort of mesh thing that has a strap around the back, and you can wrap it against any seat backing. And you can also use that on airplanes. You could use it on buses. It's definitely something that I really attribute a lot of my comfort to, because the show is about 2.5 hours long, and I tasked it only one number out of like the 32 or 33 different numbers. And that backrest is definitely a contributor to my success. And they're only about $7. For musicians specifically, invest in a quiet water bottle. I have, let's see, there's 3 microphones to my left, there's 2 in front of me, and there's 2 to my right in the woodwind section, because we have we're all each of our instruments are mic'd individually, and any noise you make, especially in a loud theater, you hear it. Like I remember one show very early on in the tour, we had it was still carpeted, but it wasn't stapled to the floor. Underneath was concrete. So when I moved my chair, that awful sort of loud reverberating chair sound when it screeches along the floor happened. And I leaned over at intermission to the Reed 3 player and I said, well, I guess I know our mics are hot all the time. and so the quiet water bottle thing, you really want one that you can, it is weird to talk about, but you do, at least in this pit, you do want one that doesn't make a whole lot of noise, and whether it's swishing back and forth or not. Like, so the water bottle that I use has a straw that goes all the way to the bottom. Unless you were looking at me, you'd never know I was using it. But for this show, that I would say that's fairly important, because with Kinky Boots and with other shows that I've done, that hasn't mattered. It hasn't been an issue. So yeah, quiet water bottle, also one that if you drop it, maybe it won't break or shatter. Like, I know a lot of people like to use aluminum or steel water bottles these days. In this pit, that wouldn't really fly, because some of the surfaces that we are on are just concrete floors. So if you drop it, everyone in the theater is going to know. I would say for woodwind musicians specifically, get a good reed knife. There are so many different climates that I've played in, and you can go from dry to wet or really quick. Like when we went from Vegas, which happened to be really hot and really dry, we went to San Diego after that, which happened that week to be incredibly wet. So all my reeds swelled up and everything was awful, and I had to work on reeds a lot more than I normally do. I would invest in a really good backpack, one that can fit everything that you need, like your computer, maybe a change of blacks, because sometimes your luggage gets lost. So you always want to make sure you have your uniform available to you at all times. It also fits my clarinet and my flute, because I do travel my flute on this tour, even though I don't play it in the show, because I don't want it to get worse. Because remember, you're always getting better or you're getting worse. So I don't want to get worse at the flute. And invest in a good pair of headphones or earbuds, because sometimes you're on flights and they're really noisy, or maybe everyone else around you is really talkative and you don't want to be. So sometimes it's nice just to unplug from the world and just dive into whatever music you're listening to at the time. So those are 3 sort of tour saving things that I would recommend that can make or break how you feel that day.
Well, it's really interesting about the water bottle. It's funny because I did a review of a reed case a couple years ago for the podcast even, and my biggest thing about it at first was I thought it was so cool how it had these magnet clasps kind of thing, but then I used it in a performance, and the problem was you couldn't shut the case quietly.
Oh no.
And if you need to switch reeds during a performance, it's a total deal breaker. So that's one of the feedback things I provided the manufacturer was like, I mean, look, it seems cool, it's a cool idea, but it makes a sound. Maybe
it's just like a personal preference thing, but I mean, I always have the philosophy of not affecting somebody else's job performance. Like everything I do, I want to do it so that it's easier for everyone else to do their job. And if you happen to have like a dry throat or have a cough welling up and you need a sip of water, and it happens to be during somebody else's solo, and there you are chugging away at your water bottle and it's making all sorts of slurpy noises, that's probably not going to improve the job performance of your colleagues. So I definitely have a lot of quiet things at I guess you could call it my cubicle, my pit cubicle. I have like a music stand box that is completely lined with felt for that very reason. I often will leave my keys or my change in my backpack for the same thing. Like I don't want my wallet, jingling. I have reeds and easily accessible so that if I do have to change any reeds mid performance. That it's easy, it's quick, and it's quiet, and hopefully nobody notices. My music stands are also have foam or felt on them, so they're quiet as well. All that kind of stuff. And I mean, the show I'm with. I mean, I keep bringing it up, but it's completely live. Like it's all so much underscoring all the time. So the mic is always on. So if you make a noise, everyone's going to know. And that's not something I want to be contributing. That was not my musical responsibility at the time. So I strive to just play the notes on the page and not add any extra percussion, as it were.
I feel like what you're saying is it's your job to perform the silences as well as the notes you're asked to play.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's actually a lot of important silence in this show too. I mean, and of course, Murphy's Law. There's this one grand sort of pause. I mean, I don't want to ruin the ending for anybody who's going to see the show, but there's a very dramatic death at one point in the show, and there's this big beat of silence, and of course, the fire alarm goes off. So, and that's actually happened on two or three occasions, and so it's interesting, how Murphy's Law works like that. But there's definitely some responsible moments where you gotta know your surroundings and not make too much noise.
Absolutely. Well, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show today. Of course, I've got many more questions. I feel like we could go on for 5 hours like I did with Ed Jaffe that time, but I want to be mindful of your time here. If I could just ask one more today, and that would be, what advice would you have for any young people looking to get into being a Broadway touring musician, or even someone who plays shows locally, the kind of music?
Well, if it's something you really want to do, then I would look at the shows that you really want to be involved with, find out what instruments there are in it, and learn them. Start fooling around, start, making educational mistakes and growing from them, and just finding ways to be involved in that. If it's your main source of income, then that's going to change the kind of decisions you want to be making. But I would recommend, especially if you're a younger musician, is just to play with the local fringe festival or the local theater company, or find a high school that's putting on a production that year and see if you can play, and just get a lot of experience. If you're older and it's important for you to be making more money, then I would definitely advise you to practice a lot. Like to prep for this show, I was practicing 8 hours a day just to learn the clarinet parts, because it was incredibly difficult stuff in the show sometimes. So what I would say to your older listeners, practice a lot and try and put yourself in situations where you can learn but also put food on the table. So maybe that's playing a show on a cruise ship, or maybe that's taking a short run show at a theater nearby you, or maybe that's a union tour or a non-union tour, and just look at the people who are doing the kinds of things that you want to do, and find out a way that you can follow the same career path, whether it is you're taking auditions, whether it's you're doing another degree, whether it's doing your undergrad or your master's, what have you. Just look at the social norms of the people who are doing the things that you are doing, and try and emulate those as best as possible.
That's fantastic. Great answer. So at the end here, I always do 6 questions called the lightning round, and they're all meant to be answered in less than a minute, kind of rapid fire here. The first one is, if I walk over to your music stand right now, what would I find on it?
Villalobos Fantasia for soprano saxophone.
What piece of music or album changed your life irreversibly?
Oh my gosh. Quintet Chicago, Cannonball Adderley and John Coltrane.
If you could play any instrument other than the clarinet, or any of the other many doubles that you play, which would it be and why?
I guess I'd want to learn the suana, which is it's like a Chinese oboe trumpet.
If you could go back in time and meet any musician, who would it be and why?
Paul Desmond, because he wrote my favorite jazz standard of all time, and he just seems like such an interesting guy. And he died well before I was ever around, so it would be a really neat opportunity to meet him.
What is that favorite jazz standard?
Take 5.
Absolutely, yeah. While we're back in time, what advice would you give your younger self?
Learn saxophone sooner. I wish I had the money and the wherewithal. Because when I heard Take Five for the first time, and then when I heard Quintet in Chicago, that Cannonball Adderley album, I had that sort of moment where it was like, wow, what is that? And my mom said, well, that's a saxophone. I wish at that moment I had taken a little bit more responsibility in my young self and said, oh, I'd like to learn how to play that. So I wish I indulged my curiosity more.
What's the best advice you ever personally received, and who gave it to you?
The best advice I was ever given was by a friend of mine who, as many musicians experience, there is a severe lull in my employment and my employability. And he said, if you don't like it, play better. So I practiced a lot and got better. And lo and behold, maybe like a half a year or a year later, I won an audition that changed the course of my career.
And sorry, who said that?
That was my friend John, and that was before I got my first cruise ship gig.
Yeah, that's such a harsh but true advice.
Yeah.
That's often the best kind.
Yeah. Well, part of it was he just didn't want to hear me complain anymore, I think. But I say that out of love.
What is one book that you think every clarinetist or musician should read, and why?
Well, the saxophone answer is The Devil's Horn, because it's just so fascinating. Without giving away too much of the book, I mean, the saxophone had so much going against it that it even exists today is quite amazing. I mean, this is a little bit cheating, but for clarinet, I think everyone should read the Barramon. But that's not really
a work of prose.
Yeah. So. I would say Playing Less Hurt by Janet Horvath, or let's go with that. Playing Less Hurt by Janet Horvath. It's about I wrote my thesis on playing related musculoskeletal disorders of the upper limbs in wooden musicians, and that was one of the books I found most informative and most fascinating. It's all about how to play and what to do when you're hurt, and what to do not to get hurt, and all that kind of good stuff that allows us to have long careers.
I have to have you back about that. Remind me in a few weeks. We should talk again. I don't want to gloss over that. That sounds like an incredibly interesting topic, especially for me. I suffered an injury last year. I had tendon lacerations on 3 fingers, and
oh my God!
Taken me.
Well, 76% of all musicians in the U.S. will experience some kind of injury that will stop them from playing for 2 or more weeks, according to my research.
My God, I'm not kidding. Let's get back in touch in several weeks and chat again. That's definitely. I'm doing a series on. I want to do a series here on career-related things like hearing protection and financial management and injury prevention. So yeah, let's talk again for sure.
Absolutely.
So, well, thanks so much for coming on today. I really, really honestly have many more questions. We could have talked all day, so I really hope you'll come back. And but before we go, is there anything else you'd like to add? Is there a place people can find you online, or?
I'm actually currently working on a number of different projects, which will hopefully be available at the end of this year. I'm working on a website and I'm working on an album. But for the time being, you can just find me on Facebook or Instagram, Garrett.Hack. If you want to reach out, it's Garrett.Hack@gmail.com. Garrett has 2 R's and 2 T's.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you so much. This was such a interesting conversation, and I really look forward to having you back in the very near future here.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Sean.
For detailed show notes for today's episode, please see clarinet.com/86. And while you're there, I invite you to join our email mailing list, support the podcast directly on Patreon, or check out the exciting links and offers available. I'm your host, Sean Perrin, and I'll see you next time for more of what's new and neat for clarinet on the Clarinet Podcast. Sanding, shaping, balancing. For centuries, mastering your instrument meant mastering these crafts too. But now, D'Addario is refining craftsmanship for the 21st century by refining their reeds and mouthpieces with the world's most innovative techniques, so you can spend less time sanding, shaping, and balancing, and more time perfecting your own craft. To learn more about the new era of craftsmanship from D'Addario Woodwinds, visit D'Addario.com/woodwinds.